Um, and we are, that's okay. We are recording tonight's event. So, feel free to turn off your cameras if you feel uncomfortable with your image being used. The Urban League is an umbrella organization. So our members include individuals from across the City of London, and we also have neighborhood associations and community groups that form our group. And really one of the things that we believe is that engaged and informed Londoners are the building block for a successful and sustainable city. And we host these events on a monthly basis. We meet the last Thursday of the month, except for June, where we have our AGM. And we do take a break in July, August, and December. But aside from that, we host these events. Because of the pandemic, we've been meeting online. In November of last year was actually the first time that we came back and met in person. And this year, we're going to try to do a mixture of online events and in-person events, because we understand that folks have different comfort levels right now, and everyone's in a different space. So we want to make sure that we're making these events accessible. Our events are free and everyone's welcome. So if you see our events come up, or if you want to know what the next topics and things that are coming up, feel free to either register for our newsletter, and Indira will put if you could put a link to our webpage. You can follow us on social media. This event's we're going to try to live stream it on Facebook. And just try to make the event as accessible as possible. So tonight we have some wonderful guests that are here, and I will pass it over to Jane so that she can introduce her guest. And feel free to pop your questions into the chat if you'd like, and if not, there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions. The first part of this meeting is dedicated to the event. And then we take just a quick break to let folks who need to leave do that. And then the second portion is the business portion of our meeting. And you're welcome to stay and sort of see what we chat about, or you're welcome to leave and enjoy the rest of your evening. So once again, welcome, Jane. I'll pass it on to you.
Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for coming out tonight. It's good to see you. In the last few years, we know that our London families have been particularly hard hit by the pandemic. And as we hopefully move to the other side, we thought it'd be a good time just to talk about how our children are coping. These are some of our voiceless members in the community, and tonight we hope to give their needs a little bit of a forum. We know that these children belong to all of us as a community, and we know that a community response to mental health is the best approach in solving our current mental health crises among young people. We're focusing on some of our collective concerns and supports tonight, and I'll be posting in the chat too some links that are available: the London District Catholic School Board, TVDSB, the hospital, the Ontario government. There's all kinds of links available for families to get supports for kids' mental health and for their own mental health as well. I think that's really important. We've got quite a few speakers tonight, so I don't want to take too much time with an introduction. But again, I'll reiterate that if you have a question, please pop it in the chat. And if it's addressed to a specific person, you might want to put that in there as well. And then what I'll do at the end, I'll sort of moderate sort of a question and answer period, but we'll sort of go through our guest speakers first, and then we'll have the questions at again. So again, thank you. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first guest, Paula Jesty. And Paula went on her own journey as a parent, looking for some mental health supports in our community many years ago. And along the way, she decided to be an amazing advocate for children's mental health in our community, and a person who has built and understands what a community of support is and what that means. So Paula, I'm going to let you take it away.
Thank you. Nice. I have a very large dog in the background. The joys of doing things on a pandemic. He might be joining us at some point, so I do apologize in advance. Thanks very much. I'm really excited to have an opportunity to speak to all of you about this program that we developed here in London, Ontario, called Am I Understanding? The program really came out of the fact that when we started looking into children's mental health, I'm going to start again. When we started this initiative, what we came across was, there wasn't a lot of attention back in 2016 around children's mental health, and yet we were starting to see an increase. As Jane said, I not only had experience as a parent with children's mental health, I also grew up with a sister with mental health, and I recognized the importance early on of early intervention and the importance of creating a community of support. When we started doing a little bit of research, we realized that almost 70% of children's mental health can be diagnosed and solved with early intervention and treatment, but that required everybody working together. So medical, schools, parents, and community all coming together to support these little ones. And while individually everybody was kind of doing their own thing and working hard, great partners at the school, great partners at the hospital, we realized there was still that stigma and shame when it came to children's mental health that a lot of families had to overcome in order to get support. My background is in television communication. I know some great folks who used to work for the Muppets. And I thought, what if we could create some tools, some free resources that communities and families could use to help start those conversations? And that's really how we began, with just the idea of, if we created a neutral platform where schools, community groups, families could watch a video that was clinically sound, developed with the right partners, but a lot of the clinical was shaken out of it. So it was really a resource they could watch without that stigma and shame. Could we help start those conversations? When we started playing these videos in the Thames Valley schools, this happened, the hands went up. We partnered with some community groups. The Optimist Club have been fantastic. And again, we were out in the community with these resources, and we found hands went up. And the idea was, as one youngster said to me, if a dog and a chicken can start a conversation about kids' mental health, why can't we? So the videos started, we developed 5 initially with the Child, Youth and Mental Health Program at LHSC in partnership with the Thames Valley District School Board. And we continued to get asks for resources from families. So we started doing community groups or exhibits in the community, then developed a program called the PIPE program, which was Parents in Partnership with Educators. And this allowed us to really sit down with families one-on-one, help them create that community support for themselves in order to get the resources that they needed to support their children. That's when we met the great folks at Western University at that point, the Child and Youth Mental Health Program, who helped us take the program that much further, doing some research around the program, around the PIPE program, and really helping us get a little bit more recognition in the community. Then the pandemic hit. The pandemic hit, and I guess if it's a silver lining, the one thing that we found was what came to light was the idea that a lot of people recognized children's mental health was on the rise. 60% on the rise, in fact, in case you're wondering about numbers. We saw such an increase in children's mental health during the pandemic that we were all of a sudden inundated here at My Understanding with families looking not only for videos, but all of a sudden looking for more resources. We obviously couldn't meet families one-on-one anymore, and we couldn't do the community exhibits, but we decided to create a program that kind of encompassed all of those resources that we were trying to provide families. And if I haven't mentioned it, all of our resources are available to families at no cost, because we found one of the biggest barriers was cost when it came to getting support for children's mental health. So with all of these things combined, we created something called MI Friends. MI Friends is an online resource that families can use to track behavior, come up with strategies, and build a plan. The idea is it takes all of our videos that are available on our website, but it partners them with the resources they need to help come up with a plan to not only support their child at home, but encourage them to also work with their community partners. Because again, our big pitch since the beginning is, as a parent, you can't do this on your own. You need to create that community of support. Through our resources, we encourage the families to, like I said, track behavior, come up with some strategies on their own, but then reach out to the wonderful folks at the school board or their community partners in the form of therapists or the other great organizations that we have in London, Ontario. What these resources do is it gives the families a voice. It helps them recognize that when they come to the table to support their children's mental health, they're part of the solution. It's not a case of them sitting back and letting everybody else do it. It really is a team approach, and that's what's so important about this program. The other thing we found that was really nice is it was great to have these resources and the characters and the puppets that kind of broke down barriers, but what if the little ones had their own poppy? So when you sign up for MI Friends program, you go on and register for the online resource. And then shortly after, you get your very own poppy in the mail. What's fantastic about this is it's very tactile. We worked really hard to make sure it was good quality. It has all the touch and feel points, but it's again something that little ones can hold on to, and it kind of becomes just one more tool in the toolbox that parents can use. We're actively, and Tiffany, I'm sure we'll talk about this further, working with the Thames Valley District School Board to get this resource out to families that need it. Obviously, our number one objective is parents, but we also want to create tools for those wonderful organizations that are currently supporting parents, help them reach out more, help them make that stronger connection, and again, help them create that community of support. And my understanding moving forward is really trying to see how many families in London we can help. We've currently got about 1,000 programs out there that we're moving through quickly, and our objective is to constantly create an opportunity for any single family that needs one will get a poppy program. We're working closely with our community partners in order to make sure that we're helping them reach the families they need. And our big pitch is if we can move forward into an era where we're recognizing that early intervention, we're going to have a better start at helping families long term. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Paula. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Dr. Colin King, and Dr. Colin King works at the Mary Wright Center, which is formerly the Child and Adolescent Clinic, which is part of UWO. So Dr. King, we're going to hear from you, and I think he has a slideshow that he's going to be popping up in just a second here.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jane. Yeah, so I'll keep an eye on the time here. So at the risk of turning this into one of my lectures for my students here, so I really am hoping it can be a conversation here kind of moving forward. And yeah, thrilled to share the virtual stage here with our kind of esteemed panel. And, you know, I think that's one piece that really sticks out to me is certainly around the shared collaboration and the pathway here that all of us are trying to really kind of find together, because I really do think that the solution, whatever that ends up kind of being here is, as we continue to navigate the different stages of the pandemic, certainly involves kind of all of us. And yeah, as my role as a director and psychologist of the Mary J. Wright Child and Youth Development Clinic, I thought what I'd try and do is gather some of my kind of thoughts in a distilled way about certainly my feedback that I've received from families along the way, certainly keeping an eye to the ground there around some of the academic research, and certainly some of my own kind of reflections at this point kind of as well. So maybe I'll just start off thinking a little bit, maybe setting the stage on my end anyways, about some of the concepts I've been thinking about as we continue to navigate certainly the mental health and well-being impacts of the pandemic. And for me, certainly one of the pieces that really rings loud and true is just the, you know, as we all know, but certainly brings to life here around just knowing that mental health is really kind of fluid and really complex, that it really can vary, you know, certainly kind of throughout the day. And if you extrapolate that over to a week, a month, a year, and knowing that it really is complex and highlighted and supported by a range of kind of different factors. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. A couple of ideas that have really resonated with me is this idea of kind of equifinality, the idea that we can kind of start from kind of different places, but end up in perhaps kind of one similar place. And conversely, this idea of kind of multifinality, the idea that we can start from kind of one kind of a place or one kind of event and end up again kind of at different levels or different outcomes there as well. Right. So this is really what this kind of first visual shows here, right? Is, you know, we can say, look at a particular group of kids or students who might be struggling and knowing that it might be perhaps due to a range of kind of different impacts and factors there. Similarly, kind of on for the right side of the diagram here, knowing that, boy, we all kind of went through the pandemic together, but again, are perhaps arriving out of that with a range of kind of different outcomes there as well. So for me, I guess it always really highlights and brings back this idea of, you know, our mental health really being impacted by different kind of levels of influence. And there's a certain model there, often we talk about the social ecological model that, you know, really has kind of the child certainly at kind of the center there with, again, their host of, you know, thinking about temperament and their own skills, but their mental health and well-being certainly being impacted and supported by certainly other levels and factors. We think about kind of the immediate family surrounding the child, thinking about other kind of informal networks, extended family, neighbors, extending out further to our communities and schools, of course, and then much more broadly thinking about perhaps kind of city and other kind of provincial policies or national policies and impacts there as well. Thinking about SERB as perhaps kind of a resource for some families and not others during the pandemic there. So for me, I'm always, asking that question now about, what was your experience like, at the beginning, middle, and continuing kind of during the pandemic, and really drawing this diagram with families to talk about individual kids and their experiences with learning. What was it like for the family? What was it like in the context of perhaps their job or changes in their occupational status and other kind of stressors there? Knowing that, again, all this kind of layered influences here are going to have an impact on one particular child or student that we might be working with at the clinic. And the last idea here is certainly around this, what we've been talking about, this kind of dual continuum of kind of mental health is, kind of doing great is not just, not meeting criteria for an anxiety disorder or a mental kind of health problem. That we can think about this idea of kind of flourishing, that folks might meet criteria perhaps for kind of a mental health problem or illness, but doing really well because of, again, the supports around them and a range of other different supports or influences. Perhaps it's medication, a supportive family, other kind of stability factors there. And conversely, that there could be a range of folks who might not meet criteria for a mental illness or a mental health disorder, but really struggling there as well. So for me, I'm always bringing that back to, again, kind of who are we talking about in terms of kind of some of our clients and groups, knowing that, again, kind of mental health can work along kind of different continuums there. And that's one piece there, again, when I'm really looking at some of the data and hearing, the continued kind of impacts of where we're at around the pandemic. And certainly, one of the biggest challenges here being is that we didn't really have a control group during COVID here. Right. And then when we ask, what was the impact of the pandemic on mental health? And my kind of short answer right now is really, it depends. It depends, knowing that we are all in the same storm, but certainly not all in the same boat kind of during that. It really depended on the resources and privilege that we have. Knowing that some of the surveys, they're looking at kind of stress impacts, with it being particularly high on young families, single parents or caregivers. That's a real kind of marked kind of piece there that I keep kind of coming back to, and knowing that, boy, for them, again, it was hard for everyone, but especially hard for some kind of our younger families. And there's a great quote there. Dr. Dylan Brown from the University of Waterloo really studies family processes and family dynamics, and really talks about this idea during the pandemic about kind of this idea of kind of stress getting kind of inside the family unit. That both kind of caregivers and kids and other folks in the family there, the idea that my kind of stress can impact, again, perhaps a young person's stress, but also kind of vice versa, that when a child is stressed, that the parent can be stressed because of that as well. And when that dynamic can get into kind of a family system there, it can be hard to kind of co-regulate it and find that kind of stability. And so that's a piece there, again, that I'm always kind of, keeping in the back of my mind as well, again, as I'm asking, what was your experience like? Does it continue to be during the pandemic? I've also been following some of the research and data here, knowing that the pandemic has had an impact on academic achievement, and how could it not? Even, again, all the best efforts of our schools and educators there in virtual learning. We know that particularly for some of our young learners there, that it is challenging. So some of the data there around some reading achievement showing anywhere from 3 to 4 months behind, perhaps compared to other kind of non-pandemic years. And again, that really varies depending on kind of the sample and resources and the type of learner there as well. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And one piece there, again, in the midst of all kind of the variability around the data that's coming out, I really have an eye on particular around some of the adolescent periods. So thinking about kind of 12 to 17-year-olds, knowing that that's a particularly vulnerable point in development around kind of mental health and identity and peer development as well, knowing that it really did have an impact in not being able to connect with peers and certainly kind of the same way as they were kind of used to. And again, some of the data there is really quite variable depending on their experiences, who are they connected to, and kind of stress levels as well. So I just gathered a couple of thoughts here that I'm sure perhaps we might kind of come back to as a panel, but just thinking about some of our work at the clinic here, where are we at right now in terms of supporting families and next steps? And certainly the piece there that I'm hearing from a lot of families is that the pandemic was certainly an additional stressor for some of the emergence of mental health difficulties. Perhaps there were some concerns before, some vulnerabilities there, but boy, kind of the pandemic really perhaps kind of tipped us over in ways that maybe we weren't kind of expecting. And a lot of our work has been around this idea of supporting emotion regulation skills. And again, I'm so thrilled that Caitlin and Tiffany and Paul are here tonight, and Jane as part of this, because this is where I think it really does take a community about learning to really kind of co-regulate again, right? We kind of lost our way during the pandemic with stress levels being up here. How do we find that calm? How do we learn the clues and the signals and the rules again about being able to manage kind of big feelings when they come up? And another theme here, certainly around some of the big feelings pieces, is certainly around some anxiety-related themes there as well. Again, for some kids there during the pandemic, learning virtually at home and being at home close to caregivers and being in their comfort zone was their kind of spot to be. There's a lot of comfort from that, and now as we're emerging from that, coming back to school and being asked to do things again, engaging in activities, that's a real stressor and anxiety producing for a lot of kids and teens there as well. So how do we get out of perhaps some of that temporary comfort piece for some kids during the pandemic and into a place there where we can manage some of those tough feelings again? And lastly there, certainly this idea of, again, kind of vulnerability of some of our vulnerable learners, particularly those who might be at risk for learning differences, learning disabilities, ADHD, is trying to untangle and disentangle the impact of the pandemic around academic learning, knowing that perhaps there were some concerns there even prior to the pandemic, going into perhaps grade 2 and knowing that again, there were some learning skills there that parents and caregivers kind of had their eye on. How do we disentangle that from now being in grade 5 and having some real concerns? So it's pandemic related versus maybe some of those lagging skills that parents had already flagged kind of pre-pandemic there as well. And again, I think as we kind of continue to navigate the next steps and from the pandemic, again, it really, for me, comes back to community and how do we use all of our different lenses and skills to arrive at a place where we can feel safe and comfortable, knowing that it's really going to take all of us to be able to get there. So maybe on that point there, Jane, I'll perhaps kind of turn it back over to you if that's okay.
That's great. And that gives us some talking points maybe for after as well. And if I could ask our final members of the panel, if I could ask Caitlin and Tiffany, I think, oh, there she is. I lost her up top there. Caitlin and Tiffany both work for Thames Valley School Board. Tiffany's role is a social worker and Caitlin is a teacher on special assignment. And both of them are working in the mental health and well-being portfolio this year and hopefully next year as well. So we're going to hear from both of them about what the school boards are doing.
Many thanks. Thank you for the invitation. I had the privilege of learning pretty intently or listening pretty intently through the last two speakers and appreciating each of their roles and influences in our community. And, just started to set the stage and understand that something that you said at the very beginning, your leader said was engaged and informed Londoners. That's what we're trying to do. And it's really helpful for us to know that being informed is kind of what we're here to do for you tonight and give you a window into some of the work that we have been doing. Paula talked about a connection and a community of support, and that is absolutely a notion that we promote and celebrate as part of our work for the public school system. So I'm Tiffany. I am a school social worker, and I have been doing this job, I am very proud to say, for nearly 19 years. Even in the title of tonight's seminar, The Kids Are Okay, I would say, you know, it's been a tough time, but we're not going anywhere. And just as Colin and Paula had both celebrated, working together and staying connected is the way that we will work our way out of many of the impacts that we are noticing now that we are at a different stage of this pandemic. So I also want to introduce my partner in crime tonight, a dear friend, Caitlin, and she can introduce herself and kind of her role as well.
Thank you, Tiffany. Can you hear me okay? I'm just making sure while I've got my headphones in. Yeah, I see some nods. Wonderful. So as Tiffany said, my name's Caitlin. I am, as Jane mentioned, a teacher on special assignment this year, which means I've been in a classroom for coming up on 10 years now. And this year I've taken on a board level position. So Tiffany and I both work with the Safe Schools and Wellbeing portfolio. So we look at, as Jane mentioned, the mental health and wellbeing side, but we also look at how do we make sure that our schools are a safe learning environment for everybody. So I've had the opportunity to teach everything from kindergarten to grade 8 in French and in English, and then some. So I've seen a wide range, and being able to experience what we might consider to be pre-pandemic teaching during the pandemic, and now what teaching looks like in this mysterious era afterwards, having that level of understanding and looking at how can we ground our work for the betterment of all of our kids. So that's what Tiffany and I are going to talk to you about.
Yeah, so we're going to give you a bit of a window into what our work looks like and what we've been working to do, especially in, you know, this present year. And we can move on to the next slide. That would be great. Thank you for the person who is working the slides as well, by the way, much appreciated. So what is Safe Schools and Wellbeing? Well, for the Thames Valley District School Board, we're a group of different people doing different roles. So we have a couple of school support counselors, and the school support counselors are folks who are counselors who work in either elementary or secondary schools, but not in every single one, select ones. We also have a team of 3 social workers. So I happen to be a school social worker, and there are 2 other full-time social workers working with us. And then we have a complement of educators. And so there's 2 different sort of roles defined there. One role is something called an implementation coach. And you might wonder what we're implementing, but we're going to teach you about that in just a second. And then we also have learning coordinators who are also coaches. So I think, Caitlin, we have 4 implementation coaches and then 2 learning coordinators as well. So that's 6 educators on the team. And then we have an overall administrator, so a principal who guides our work in safe schools and well-being, because safe schools is a big part. We want to make sure we have safe environments and all of the things that are needed in order to inform those safe environments. And then we also have a manager of student mental health. And so that is a person who kind of oversees all of the mental health and well-being work that happens in our system and responses that happen in our system. And that's a really important role to inform some of the things Colin was talking about: knowledge and information, best practices, use of resources. And so we work together, this group, to influence and deliver and coach and promote the most important information we know helps students be available for learning. And so if we want to move to that next slide, here is our, biggest kind of idea and what we work every moment to promote. So you'll see that there is a triangle there, and we lovingly refer to it as the triangle. And you'll see that what we know is necessary for students to be able to learn optimally is the foundation of relationship. And you can see how that idea of relationship, encircles every other element of our essential conditions for learning. So what we know from research that happened, pre-pandemic, that occurred during pandemic, we continue to get information about the impacts of the pandemic. And when Colin was talking about disproportionality, that's the idea that if you weren't doing well before the pandemic, then the pandemic kind of multiplied that by 10 10. And if you were doing okay before the pandemic, then chances are you weren't as proportionally affected. We were all affected. That is definitely true. But for some folks, there is a disproportionate effect. What we know counteracts, or what supports our kids to come back in to learn, as Colin was talking about, was this idea that if they feel like they have a relationship, not only with their educator, but also with their peers and other people in their school building, then they feel even more safe and able to take risks, connected with each other and with their educators. And then we're going to talk about getting regulated too. So when I talk about feeling safe, thank you for sharing those different links that we've provided there. We really encourage folks to go take a look at some of our resources. And if you're interested in essential conditions for learning, the other thing that's really helpful is we have videos for caregivers on our public facing website that can tell you a little bit more about each one of these conditions. But to just give you a sense, when we talk about feeling safe for our students, what we're really promoting is this idea that students ought to feel safe to do things and safe from the harms of other things. So things like feeling safe to ask questions, to take risks in their learning, feeling safe to be themselves and celebrate, different compositions of families and who they are and their identity, and even feeling safe to make mistakes, which can be a tough thing. And safety from the things that we want all of our kids and families to be safe from things like harm and injury, safe from discrimination, bullying, racism. We want our environments to feel safe. And so part of the work that Caitlin and I do is we go to schools across the whole valley and we promote these ideas. We support educators. In fact, actually, we had a privilege this week. This is a bit of a spoiler, but what we've learned is that pandemic helped everyone know how to do webinars a little bit more and use the internet and access things like this that might otherwise not feel so comfortable. This week alone, Caitlin and I had the privilege of visiting 75, actually over 75 different classrooms through virtual field trips to talk about mental health and well-being. And so we got lots of feedback across the system, including that some students were, didn't have many opportunities before to talk about mental health and well-being, and other students were really well informed. And no matter what, the students benefited from being able to talk about mental health and mental health promotion and keeping themselves mentally healthy and well, including support seeking. So another condition here that's listed is being connected. Well, what does that mean? How do we promote that? Well, it's like intentional activities to get to know the students, to encourage them to kind of communicate with one another in healthy ways. We do things like intentionally using their name, and you'll see a list coming up next of all kinds of ideas. And the other thing about being connected is we teach our educators about this notion of like an emotional bank account. So if you think about a bank account, that's something that, well, many of us would like to make as many deposits as possible. But there are inevitable withdrawals. And sometimes withdrawals are things that we can't necessarily predict. But we can intentionally make lots and lots of deposits by connecting with kids and helping them know that we see them and we hear them, and that even if things might feel confusing or they might be a little behind, we're here with them, and we are going to do things to help support maybe that learning loss that Colin was talking about a little bit, and getting creative with the ways that we do that. The last piece of our kind of triangle that informs like optimal availability for learning is this idea of being or getting regulated. And so this is where it's really fun, because sometimes we teach students about things like brain science and the whole brain child. And I do this because this is your brain. And we talk about the upstairs brain and the downstairs brain and what happens when you flip your lid a little bit, or it feels like it might be coming, and you might have lots of really big feelings, which Paula talked about. And so we talk to them about other things like mindfulness and calming practices in the classroom, regular daily activities to help you, achieve your calm, everyday practices, those kinds of really important things we teach students about from the very beginning, from the very beginning, so that, maybe if there is a point like Colin was talking about in that quadrant where they're experiencing some mental health challenges, then they already have a repertoire of things that they can do to help them get or feel or start to become regulated again. And we don't have them do those things on their own. We're with them, we support them, and we practice with them. So this, the other thing you see on the other side of the page is it looks kind of like just, a one pager. Actually, what that's called is a foldable. And so in that foldable, we have given to every single educator in Thames Valley District School Board this information, and it opens just like this. It's got 3 panels, and it opens, and it is all about these important essential conditions for learning. There could be no more important time than implementing these essential conditions for learning with our kiddos who are returning to what looks to be the first full in attendance in-person school year since the pandemic hit. Because that's part of what's going to help us get regulated again and return to those, feelings of connection and safety in our schools, and being able to be regulated to be available to learn. We can go to the very next slide.
Thank you for that, Tiffany. And I think you've even taken bits and pieces from this slide, so I won't go too far into it. But this slide just kind of gives some examples, as Tiffany mentioned, of some of the ways that these things come to life, right? So we have these essential conditions for learning that we base so much of our work in. And what does that actually look like in the classroom or in the school community? So as Tiffany mentioned, a small little thing, but that can make such a big difference, is encouraging staff members to greet students by name in a warm and welcoming way. We talk about getting to connect. So what do you know about that student? How well do you know their family or their background, things like that. I'll let you read through some of those, but I also just want to describe a little bit more. Tiffany mentioned this idea of an implementation coach, which gets to be my privilege and job this year. So there's a team of 4 of us who tackle the elementary panel, and then the other 2 look after the secondary panel. And our role is to be able to support all of the educators across the valley. So in my case, I'm assigned to 33 different schools right now, and any educator, be it a principal, an EA, an ECE, anybody in that building even, can reach out to their implementation coach for support. And it's a very, very flexible model that anything that has to do with this triangle that you see, we can help support, because my job is to help build their capacity. What we've really looked at it as a system is we used to do a lot of presentations where somebody would come in and be the official and they'd talk about something and they'd leave. But what we're really looking at is shifting that model and recognizing that our educators are the ones who have the relationships with the students. So we need to empower them to be able to have this content, to be able to be informed about it, and to feel confident in sharing it with their students so that they can continue to build those relationships. So when we talk about that idea of safety and connectedness, when we're talking about difficult topics, whether it's mental health or whether it's cyberbullying, or there's so many others, when we look at talking about those, we recognize that kids need to feel safe and connected in order to even open up about that. So that's where we're really looking at the educator taking the lead on that with the support of our implementation team. Another one I just wanted to touch on here is we talk about the idea of teaching students to communicate, problem solve, and collaborate. So not only is that just a matter of, the little things that happen on the recess yard, or, somebody took this, or I'm upset about that. There's certainly elements of that. And it also goes into the social emotional learning of being able to identify and name their feelings. But the other piece that we're really starting to focus on is this idea of restorative practice and restorative justice. So encouraging and allowing students the say and the voice to be able to navigate their own problems with guidance. So how do we restore and repair relationships at any level when there's been harm that's been done? And so that often comes with students who might be dysregulated, which we're seeing a lot of post-pandemic era. We're seeing a fair bit of dysregulation. And so how do we navigate and repair that when those sorts of things happen? Another one I'll just touch upon, Tiffany mentioned that brain science lesson. She talked about mindfulness and daily practices. One of my favorite things that I've been able to do is work with a lot of educators on exactly that, is teaching students about how their brain works at an age appropriate level, so that students are better equipped with an internal understanding of what's going on, which gives them a certain level of empowerment, but it also gives them a common language. So when an entire like class, or even I've worked in schools where it's an entire division, when that whole division can just even gesture to a teacher and go, and everybody knows that means I flipped my lid and that I can't regulate, I can't make decisions, don't ask me questions right now, right? That gives, it's really, really powerful. So that's been another piece that we've been working on. And then also recognizing that every single student is different and unique. So we've been working on this idea that one solution isn't going to work for everybody. We can't just keep saying to kids, you just got to breathe more. Have you tried some deep breathing? Some of our kids are getting rather dysregulated at that. And I can understand why, because breathing isn't the solution for everybody. So we've been empowering educators and informing them on a wide variety of tools and strategies, and working with the kids to create personalized menus so that they have an understanding of, gee, when I start feeling like this, how do I know? And we talk about body clues. We talk about, I notice that my hands start to tense, but for somebody else, it might be that my face gets really hot. So we work them through this idea of self-reflection. What is it? What body clues does your body give you? And then what are your personal strategies for being able to regulate yourself? So that's been another really powerful way that we've been helping to support our educators and in turn support our students. We can keep going there.
Awesome. So a lot of the things that we've been kind of teaching you about, we can head to the next slide if that's okay. Thank you. A lot of the things that we've been kind of sharing with you this evening are what we would call like universal support. So every single school, every single educator has access. These are really important messages that we are promoting system-wide. So it's universal. The other thing we just want to remind you of or bring to your attention is that not only does everyone have, in our school systems have access to this information about essential conditions for learning, but also we have a really robust special education department and different resources available. Now, what we would call that is slightly different. If we call the universal, it's sort of a tier 1, then what I'm talking about in special education resources is maybe a tier 2. So let's say, for example, that we know that our child, as Paula was talking about earlier, we have noticed that we're having some struggles. We have accessed some really brilliant, as far as I'm concerned, community resources, including Paula's organization, Am I Understanding? We're, doing work at home. We know that our child has some things that they're really struggling with. Then the first and foremost, what I say is get connected and communicate. The same as we say to our students. Let someone at school know that there's a struggle, a school staff that you might trust. As you continue to communicate and work together to support the child and help them build relationships, feel safe, be connected, and get regulated at school, if you're communicating with the school-based staff, including your administrators, your learning support teachers, the classroom teachers, other folks that you might be connected to, there may be a time where there's a recommendation to have conversations with people who might be a member of the special education team. So this picture here on this slide is right from the public website that helps to describe all of the different kind of professionals that may be able to be accessed to support a child. So that might include school counselors, as I had mentioned earlier, school social workers. We have psychometrists and psychologists. We have many other highly specialized professionals that work alongside families and students to kind of support the child and the family. So we don't say just the child, we say child and family. In some cases, those professionals may provide some direct services or even referrals to other kind of community organizations. So we just wanted to bring that to your attention so that you could know that there are additional resources, and much like the way that folks can access things kind of free of charge, those professional services in schools would not be cost-based, they would be referral-based, which means that in order to gain those services, you have to be able to communicate with the different people at a child's school in order for them to be aware of what's happening and the support that's needed. So we just kind of wanted to bring that to your attention as well. And then, we have one more slide, I think. Awesome.
And just before we jump into this last little piece, I also just wanted to mention a big piece. We've talked about this idea of like communicating with the school, and, as Paula mentioned, that can be really tricky. not everyone feels as empowered or has the basis or understanding to be able to go in and advocate when their child needs it. And so one of the pieces about this, about these essential conditions for learning, and one of the sites that I shared, is just this idea that we're sharing this widely. This is not a hidden secret thing that Thames Valley is keeping. This is a very public-facing model. And our hope is that that also allows families to come in and use it as a framework when they advocate for their kids, to say, you cannot expect my child to be learning right now when they don't feel safe, or my child is really struggling with regulation, so I need some help, right? Or, you know what, my child doesn't feel really connected to the school community, so I need some help with that because they don't want to come to school right now. So being able to use this language and these resources is one of our steps to try and help empower families as well. And our last piece that we'll just talk about here is another community partnership that involves Thames Valley District School Board, as well as the London Catholic District School Board. And I want to say over a dozen community partners who we all come together. And I believe it started last year. It was recognized that, there's this need for parents to have resources. We have lots of things in place for kids, but are the parents getting the same information? So the Family Wellbeing Community Workshop Series was created. And what it does is it invites different community partners to come in and speak to their subject areas, because we are not the experts in all of this. There are so many people in the community, like Dr. Colin King, who has graciously signed up for a few this spring. And there's so many different community partners who come in and speak to their area of their subject area and provide these little webinars. So that's one of the links that we just put in the chat there as well. And we have our first one for the spring lined up coming up on February 15th. So, I'm going to send it right now, actually. There we go. We would love it if you share that along as well. It's this particular topic coming up is with regards to healthy intimate relationships and the idea of consent, which is certainly a topic that many of our youth and families need to have a little basis in. So that's just our last piece there. And we'll turn it over to Jane and any questions.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. If anyone has any questions, they can pop it into the chat. And before we just look at some of those questions, one of the things that I kept thinking about when the speakers were talking was the idea of safety. And I think I hear repeatedly from parents and other people in the community that they don't feel safe yet. That's part of the issues. There are community members themselves who don't feel safe either out in the community or don't feel their kids are safe at school yet. How do you, and I think I'll ask Dr. King first, is how do you help parents, I guess, and caregivers start to take those steps themselves so that they start to maybe have play dates again, participate in the library, going to reading things, the things that used to make pre-pandemic days sort of, for want of a better word, normal parenting activities and community activities. When I look at the work of the Urban League too, things that go on in our neighborhoods that aren't being participated in the same way. What can we do as a community, I guess, and what do you suggest, and how do you help parents with those sorts of feelings that we're hearing about?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jane. I think for me, I really start off with the patience and compassion piece of recognizing kind of what, again, we've all been through this, a difficult period, and that all of us are coming out at different starting points, and that can even be within the same family. You've got one kid kind of raring to go back to sleepovers and all the other activities, and perhaps another one who's certainly kind of not there yet. So for me, I think it's looking at kind of rather than, even over a week, over a month here, but, thinking about, where's kind of the trajectory that we're on, and knowing that perhaps, again, it's a gradual return, and having some of the compassion with ourselves if we're not perhaps where we would like to be. And I think for some of our kiddos there, again, it's so, reassuring hearing all the wonderful messages from the schools there as well, but particularly for some of our anxious kids, if they do need a little bit extra support there, kind of getting to that next step there. Again, that's where I think reaching out to some of the community professionals, and certainly, again, the team at the school board and educators can be a great way as well of, again, kind of assembling your team there to help kiddos kind of with those next steps as well. And again, when anxiety is really kind of calling the shots there, it can be helpful again to have that community and some of that professional step to get to kind of that next level. Because for lots of kids there, if anxiety's in the driver's seat there, it would prefer we always kind of remain at home. So if we're having a hard time getting to those next steps there, don't hesitate to be reaching out.
Yeah, and they're getting that anxiety, I think, from the parents sometimes too, right? That's just that whole idea that you talked about before of that stress being part of the family. So thank you. Thank you for that. Are there any more questions or thoughts that people wanted to discuss? You can pop them into the chat. I don't see anything there.
So I just I think it's more a comment, but one of the things I really liked about what you all shared is, you know, involving the parent. It's a child and the parent. A lot of the times, you know, there's that focus on the child because you're with that child at the moment, but sometimes it's that, especially you know, for families where maybe English isn't the first language at home, where that child is, you know, taking that information and taking it home, right? It doesn't necessarily translate the way that you might want to. So I really like this idea of having those resources for the parents, and I think that's also one of the great things that MI Understanding does, is that, you know, that it's in a format that's for the child, but the message there is also for the parent. So for folks who haven't had an opportunity to look at those resources, I see that Paula shared the link in the chat. So really, I'd encourage you to look at that, because there are a number of resources there that are really fantastic. And you know, and Colin, I really like the fact that you shared, you know, we're all going through this, but we're not in the same boat. And I think, you know, for you know, just recognizing that everyone's at a different starting point, and that the pandemic has really affected people in different ways. I think that that's really important, and just for people to really have that grace. And Caitlin, I know that, you know, you shared just also recognizing that you don't have all the answers, right? And bringing those community partners, and I think that's something that we've seen at the league as well, just with us going to online, right, and sort of losing that connection, is finding ways to actually ask for help, and knowing that there's this community around you is really going to make a difference, and especially as we sort of move forward in this, you know, new climate. So thank you so much for, you know, for sort of sharing all those pieces.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. Thank you for that.
Oh, and we do have a question there, just that, and this question is for Tiffany. And just before I hand it over to Tiffany and Caitlin, the question is, I'm curious to know if programs that Tiffany and Caitlin spoke about that are happening here at London schools are also available within other school boards. We support students at Amethyst Demonstration School here in London, but all are from school boards across Southwestern Ontario. I'm curious to know if we can share this with their parents and give contacts for their home school board.
Awesome question. Thank you, Kelly, and thank you, Jane, for reading that for us. So I would say the essential conditions for learning are a Thames Valley District School Board specific initiative. And so Thames Valley District School Board covers Elgin, Oxford, and Middlesex County. I think it's like something like the second largest board in the whole province. It's a big one. What I would say though, and I'm not sure if this has made it to the chat yet or not, so I'm really glad you asked the question, Kelly, is there is an organization in Ontario called School Mental Health Ontario. And this is an organization that is a partner of the Ministry of Education. And the purpose of the entire existence of this organization, and it is an excellent quality like the resources coming from the organization are brilliant. School Mental Health Ontario informs the work of mental health professionals in schools across the province. And so, Kelly, what I would recommend is that you head to School Mental Health Ontario and you check out the really excellent quality resources that are there. Not only are there resources for parents, there are also resources for educators. There are also resources directly for students, elementary and secondary, for students from Catholic schools and from public schools. And there are just so many resources and resources for educators, lesson plans, just really great quality things that would be all Ontario wide. And so we really look to that guiding organization to inform, especially our mental health supports in schools, and the way that we develop interventions and also information campaigns. So we highly recommend checking out that resource.
Yeah, and just to add, I put the stuff up there from the Catholic school because they certainly have great plans on this as well. And one of the things you have to realize is that in the microcosm, every school needs to have a safe schools plan, a health and well-being plan. It doesn't matter what board they belong to, and that's based on their board's overall health and well-being portfolio and their plans, and that's mandated by the ministry. So that's good practice right across the province. So those are going to be available. It's just kind of, I guess, digging around, and it wouldn't take too much digging around. I think if you put mental health and well-being in the search bar of any district school board, you're going to find those resources and find those contact people. Call the board and ask them who the contact people are. They'll be happy to tell you and get you in touch with them.
Now, Kelly, if you don't mind, though, I do just want to ask a little follow-up question to you, because if I recall correctly, and I'm just reading through your message again, the Amethyst demonstration schools are a temporary piece. And so what I think you're saying is that you might have students from multiple different school boards within your school. Is that correct? I think Jane's giving me the yes. So if that's the case too, especially given that you do have Thames Valley students, I would suggest that we would still be able to support to some degree as well, whether it be through our special education department or us. But one thing too to remind you is just when you asked about sharing for the parents, there's one link that I put further up ahead, and it is a public facing site. It is our Thames Valley public facing site, and there are some beautiful, beautiful videos that talk about those essential conditions for learning that apply to anyone, right? Like it doesn't have to be that this is a Thames Valley only thing. That is for everybody in the public to have, because it talks to things like, and Dr. Colin King has said this multiple times, we need to learn how to co-regulate. Right. And Paula's work focuses on how to help parents learn to co-regulate. There is a whole beautiful video about regulation within that framework there. So please feel free to share that site with families. It is a public facing site, and we're happy to support that. Yeah, I would just leave that there. Sorry.
Okay, great.
And I just want to add for School Mental Health Ontario, it does have some resources on there that are adapted for the Catholic school board as well. So, and, most of the resources on there are also available in French. So that, School Mental Health Ontario really is trying to encompass it all. So definitely a resource that I would recommend.
And Miranda, that was another piece I just wanted to mention, because you were talking earlier about multilingual families. And so just as another piece of information to help other families, for all of you to be able to go forward and to help advocate, is that if there's ever a situation where you do have a family where English is not the first language or the comfortable language, every family has the right to access and to ask for a translator. And that is a board provided resource. So it might take a little bit of, scheduling, but that is absolutely something that the board can provide. And I also know, because Tiffany and I, as well as Jane, have been working with Paula for the MI Friends program, that they are also looking at expanding their resources to be in other languages as well, which is another fantastic way that community partnership is looking to meet the needs of our families, because our families don't all speak English. And so getting that information to those parents, I really applaud Paula and her organization for looking at that and taking that seriously. So thank you.
Well, I know we're getting close to our business portion of the meeting, so I just want to thank our guests again for all their great thoughts. And I know the kids are all right, because they're in the capable hands of these people in this community. And if you have any follow-up questions, please direct them to the Urban League. We can put you in touch with anyone from this panel, and we have access to other resources as well that we can get you in touch with if you're interested. There's an awful lot of sites that have been listed here, and we will work on sort of a better one sheet that kind of explains what those all are, and send that out with our newsletter and to the people who were here tonight, just so you have all those handy. So thank you again to our esteemed guests. Your time was greatly appreciated. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So we'll just give folks a chance to